Palingenesis by Simon Harewood. Book 3, Heart of the Sear. Chapter 15. On the March. A lone figure hurried along the deep shadow of the fortress wall. It was already well into the third watch, and nothing stirred inside the town of Keris. He was breathing heavily, a little cloud marking each exhalation in the cold night air. Every so often he would pause to look furtively into the darkness behind him. When finally he reached the barred gate, all attempts at concealment were abandoned. A name was called up at the watchtower and repeated urgently when there was no immediate response. The challenge came and was answered impatiently. Heavy bolts on the postern gate were drawn back and he was admitted to the fortress. As soon as he stepped inside, the man threw back his hood, revealing a weathered face with heavy brows drawn into a permanent frown. The guard recognized him and nodded respectfully. The newcomer spoke in a gruff voice.
"Where is Delacan?" "The captain is abed. 'Tis late." "Take me to him. I have urgent tidings that will not await his convenience."
The guard stepped into an adjoining room and shook the nearest form into wakefulness. The sleepy protestations were ignored. Two figures reappeared, one dragging his feet.
"He will take you,"
the guard said, pointing out the yawning fellow.
"I have to get back into the tower."
Delacan knew that only ill news could drag him from his bed at such an hour, and he had been expecting only the worst since the previous morning when the scouts from the pass had warned him of a full-scale Aranite invasion. A vast enemy host was descending upon them from the north at speed, and would be there sometime the following day. With the paltry force Fengor had assigned to him as a garrison, there was little he could do to resist the invaders. Even now he cursed the necessity that had placed him, at age 25, at the head of the forces in Keris. Then it had seemed like an honor to be singled out for such responsibility, despite his initial reservations. Now those fears were about to bear their horrible fruit. He felt betrayed, sacrificed, to face impossible odds without chance of heroics or even distinction. And now there was another messenger of doom at his door. He received a man in his antechamber, where a brazier had been hastily lit against the northern night air. The face was familiar, a veteran scout from Lunvier. The bad tidings were rolling in from every side. There were no apologies for disturbing his rest, no formalities of address.
"I regret to inform you of recent developments in Nuria. The commander at Lunvier waited to confirm the wild reports before passing them along to you. King Fengor is most certainly slain, along with the host that set out with him to subdue Ligerium. Prince Lucane has taken over the kingship, but is hard-pressed in Belruth, cut off by a host of swarmlings."
Delacan interrupted.
"There is a swarm then, as of old."
A quick nod confirmed this before the scout continued.
"The southern cities have been overrun. Stor, Gerdel, probably Ingeval, and the people are lost. All of them."
He paused, as if shocked by speaking such terrible pronouncements aloud. His tired eyes were dull.
"We know nothing of Gilreth, only that Count Byran did not answer the muster, and thus escaped the slaughter at Stor. Why he has not come to the aid of Belruth is unclear."
He cleared his throat.
"It would be best to empty the farms here and pull back to Lunvier. If raiders from Aran appear, there can be no help from the east."
He stared as Delacan smiled wryly and folded his arms. His voice rose in irritation.
"This has nothing to do with seniority of rank. It is just good sense."
Delacan would have laughed had the situation not been so severe.
"I heard you. I'm afraid it is a little late for us to retreat. The farmers have all come in this very day. You see, there are perhaps 40,000 Aaronites in the pass, and they will arrive here before noon tomorrow.
The scout stared at him in shock. His strength seemed to desert him, and he sat down heavily.
This is the end of Nuria. They strike when we are without defense. Nothing will stop them from subjecting every lost town, every stronghold.
Delican almost enjoyed the man's despair. For once the superior self-assurance of the Lundvir lot had evaporated. He pursed his lips, barely keeping a note of sarcasm out of his voice.
I suppose you will not linger here till morning. Please convey my greetings to the commander in Lundvir, and tell him, as one of the 25 valiant defenders of Keris, Captain Delican will do his duty on the morrow. I cannot promise to delay the invasion by even an hour, but the place will not fall while I live.
There was no sleep for the remainder of the night. What did it matter if he was tired or refreshed? He would not see another night in Myrol. He would not marry, would not raise a family, would not win renown on the field of battle. The end of his world had come upon him, and even if, by some miracle, Nuria was to endure after all, it would continue without him. The men they had left him were poor specimens, the best being commandeered for the invasion of the south. Delican was half afraid that, having made up his mind to sacrifice the garrison, they would desert him and leave him nothing but the ignominy of surrender and execution. At the very least, he wanted to die with a blade in his hand. Surely the fates owed him that much. The morning muster, a routine affair, filled him with nostalgia. He ordered double rations for every man, allowing them use of the best ales. There was no reason to leave it for Aaronite throats. As soon as the enemy vanguard was spotted mid-morning, he ordered the farmers and their families to the walls to give the appearance of numbers. Perhaps he could negotiate for the lives of those unable to fight. Many of these folks were hillmen and not Nurian. The Aaronites might show mercy to them. Tense moments followed as they watched the marching lines approach, the sun glittering on spears and shields. The Nurians stared in disbelief, all thought of resistance fading from their minds. There was no end to the enemy formations. Line upon line came down the road, carrying their packs and weapons, but strangely unarmored, as if they did not even expect to fight that day. There were no taunts or war cries as they came within range. No arrows rained down upon the defenders. In fact, the vanguard did not even slow their step as they passed under the walls and continued down the road. Here and there a man glanced up at the Nurians on the wall, but there was no malice in their gaze, no veiled threat in their manner. Delican hesitated. Should he not order the few bowmen to loose their arrows at these invaders? Was his fortress to be ignored? He could not decide whether he should be relieved at such a thought or ashamed. He ought to make them aware that there were still a few men left in Nuria to draw the sword. It would be a disgrace to let the enemy march unopposed into his homeland, while he stood by, watching and hoping to be spared. He had just about made up his mind to attack when the formations under his wall changed dramatically. Strange men in black uniforms, the majority of them dark-skinned, led by 3 figures that were undoubtedly Nurian, replaced the Aaronite columns. Behind these came loosely grouped figures with an assortment of arms, bareheaded for the most part. They were Nurians, youths and boys, with a scattering of men among them. The defenders on the wall lowered their weapons, staring. Soon whispers started, growing to exclamations of surprise as the huge enemy formation came to a standstill at the given signal, not 20 yards from where they stood. Delican noticed another disturbance to the south. Another column, insignificant compared to the first, was approaching from that direction, marching up the farm lanes. It contained mostly black uniformed figures, with what appeared to be women and even children among them. He was exceedingly puzzled. The men below their walls were not in formation to storm the fortress. Now that they had halted, they sat down where they were, bringing out dry rations and water skins, conversations starting up everywhere. It was as though they were merely having a break from the marching. Some were even smiling or laughing, apparently enjoying the amazement of the defenders on the wall. As soon as the new column came up with the rest, there was an enthusiastic greeting, and a number of Aeronite lords went out to meet with them. A few forms detached themselves from the general crowd and walked towards the town. At last the ultimatum would be given. It was a Nurian who led the party. What was happening? Were these traitors to Nuria, fugitives harbored by the enemy? He had no idea that there could be so many Nurians that were disloyal. The man strode forward, right up to the gate, and spoke in a tone of authority. He did not bother to carry a token of truce. Delican realized there was no need. The captain of Keris went down to the gate himself. He ordered his men to open the postern, but to keep their weapons at the ready. Another surprise awaited him here. Delican stepped outside his fortress, aware of the hundreds of eyes focused on him. The Nurian stood a few paces in front of his fellows and addressed him directly.
I am Rune Seth Alberad, brother to the late Fengor. Are you the commander here?
Delican nodded dumbly. He could hardly believe his ears.
My name is Delican Seth Annuan, captain of the garrison left here. What are your terms?
There are no terms, Captain. This host you see here is no threat to Nuria, and you are not under siege. In fact, we march to the relief of Belruth, this hour under threat not only from the Swarm, but the traitor Malik Yulian, and his southern host. There are refugees in our company, people from the southern lands long overrun, including the former queen of Ligurium. They are in need of your aid in the form of supplies. Open your gates to these people and speed them on their way to the pass.
Delican frowned at the man opposite him. Such fantastic claims could have been laughed to scorn a season before, but now they could very well be true. It would be a supreme humiliation, though, if he was to be taken in by them, only to lose the opportunity to resist the invasion. After all, the man in front of him was a known criminal and a liar. It would be folly to trust such a one. He chose his words with care.
I am inclined to believe you, Lord Rune, but you will understand that prudence will not allow me to take that risk. I cannot let you pass unmolested.
Rune's jaw dropped.
Great Imran's beard. Do you intend to attack me?
The young man's tone became almost pleading.
What would you do in my position?
Rune shook his head in disbelief. His voice was filled with sarcasm.
Fine. Let me present you with terms, then.
Delican looked like an apprentice being reprimanded.
Firstly, Captain Delican, while we are talking here, Belruth could be burning. Secondly, there is no point in resisting to death against such odds as you face here. What has Fengor ever given you that you would love his memory more than your own country? Be a real patriot and join your men with ours. This is not an Aeronite invasion. It is aid from a forgotten ally, without which Nuria will certainly cease to exist. Now, you seem like someone with reasonable intelligence. If what I say is not true, explain the presence of hundreds of Viron among the Aeronites, and why I offer you a hand of friendship instead of merely crushing your tiny force before the noon watch commences. Now surrender your fortress to me immediately, or be remembered as the biggest fool ever to command a garrison on either side of the pass.
The young man slowly drew his blade and extended it hilt first to Rune.
The place is yours, Prince Rune, as are the swords of its garrison. I am not a martyr, nor a fool. Take what you need from the storehouses, and let me know how else I may be of service to you.
Rune smiled at him.
I want every able-bodied man to be issued arms and armor. We march within the hour.
Malik the Undying, Lord of Terrallen and Manborg, God King of the Amul, conqueror of Lysan and Ligerium, drew back the thin veil of his carriage, allowing his gaze to sweep over the passing fields and orchards, lying silent under the light of the twin star. The pestilent Viran who had toiled and labored here were no more. The supplanting progeny of hate had been eradicated at last, yielding their lands, their homes, their substance to the children of the shadow. The exultation washed over him in waves, never ending, the further he went into the northern lands. The final moments of revenge were sweeter than he could have imagined. How moralizing weakness had fallen before ruthless expedience. He laughed to think of Fengor's clumsy efforts to free himself of the debilitating scruples of his race. In the end, it had merely hastened his undoing, paved the way for his final overthrow of Imran's legacy. Surely the judgment would have to follow this conquest, the vindication of his undoubted mastery, his complete triumph over an adversary mightier in brute force, but infinitely inferior in cunning and intellect. Then he would cast her aside as Imran had done, and laugh at her distress when she realized the truth. Her hurt, her anger, her affections had been means to an end only, to be ridiculed now that he needed her no longer. Even the great cities were largely undamaged. The Swarmlings made no use of siege weapons to break down walls. They simply scaled these obstacles in their mindless charges. The people of the south, so long confined in the stinking swamps, could find dwellings and tilled soil wherever they went. Rich rewards for the faithful. From here he would strike at Aaron across the pass, first distracting them with a renewed invasion from the south, then to deal with those pesky Vadran. Buildings loomed up out of the dark. The host had halted just before dawn. They had reached Sear, a mere 30 miles from Belruth. There were no lights here, no movement. The swarm had done its work well. The carriage moved on through cobbled streets, guided by his guards to the best dwelling in the town. Here he would wait till the scouts returned from the Nurian capital, bringing tidings of the state of affairs there. What a surprise awaited poor Lucane! How the boy would wonder at what he saw, the unimaginable might from the swamplands, an army equipped and fed by Viran toil and blood. It was not easy to find rest that day with his triumph so near. Eduokir did not leave the scouting to Hekan's veterans. In his estimation, they were cowardly rogues, motivated by self-interest alone. Reports delivered by such as they would not be reliable. Besides, he had a strong desire to see the notorious Belruth castle for himself. If there were to be a siege, he would like to have time to gauge the strength of the defenses. If earlier reports could be believed, the garrison lacked the numbers to drive off the remnants of the swarm. Even with the great walls to protect them, such a paltry force would not last long against a determined assault. As he loped onward with a hand-picked group of warriors, the excitement he had felt at first crossing the inn at Store multiplied. Only one more river lay between them and their ultimate goal, and the road was paved all the way there. Here, at the northern extreme of the world, he would prove to Hekan's mob, as well as the disdainful Tuur overlords, the worth of the Amul elite. Just as he had crushed the proud Ligerians, their northern allies would be shattered. Aldred watched the exchange between Rune and the garrison commander with amusement. Were these northerners so foolhardy that they would contemplate resisting such a vast army as stood before their gates this day? She could hardly believe her eyes when considering the columns of foreigners thronging the road from the west. Surely with such numbers to oppose him, Malik Yulian could be stopped. She saw the young man offer his blade to Rune, and heard the mumbles of assent from among the Aaronites. There remained hope in a world where so much bitterness and hatred could be overcome and forgotten. Rune came away from the negotiations with an amused expression on his face. He winked to her as he came closer and beckoned her forward, heading for a clump of important-looking foreigners. All these men regarded her with interest as they approached, making her acutely aware of her need to refresh her appearance after the long and hasty march. Rune gripped the extended hand of the smiling Aaronite closest to him, and nodded to the rest. His tone was formal yet convivial.
Your Highness, may I present the former Princess Aldred from what used to be Ligerium, daughter of the late King Tregoran.
The king acknowledged her courtesy with a raised hand and a nod. Rune continued.
Late Princess Aldred, His Majesty King Ranald of Arran.
The young king of Arran seemed a pleasant man to her, and his voice betrayed intelligence and tact, both of which had been lacking in the royal house of Ligerium. He even lent a certain dignity to the island words he used to address her. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Princess." He seemed to emphasize the word, purposely ignoring Rune's comment. "And may I express my condolences on the passing of your father. Is your mother among the survivors?"
Thank you, Your Majesty, and yes, she is. The ones who could not travel so fast will arrive towards evening, I believe.
A pity, for we have to march on without delay. I would very much like to meet her. I take it you will await her arrival here. Please convey my greetings to her, and be assured of my continued protection anywhere within the Western Realm. Aldred was warmed and more than a little surprised by this generosity. Much had to have happened to alter the ingrained attitudes and tradition of hostility and suspicion prevalent in the past.
I thank you on behalf of my mother and myself, King Ranald. Your compassion is truly overwhelming.
Rune introduced her to the other men with Ranald, Earl Wayne of Linvale, middle-aged and already graying, Captain Railf, a bearded, tough-looking character who tried his utmost to appear courteous, and Captain Evrain of Kiel, the friendly fellow who had greeted Rune earlier. She smiled at them, realizing again what great changes had to have occurred since her abduction in Greycast till her recent arrival on the Viron shore. These men appeared to be so different from the ignorant aggressors she had believed them to be since her childhood. Just one more thing in which the sages of Ligerium had been duped. They made their way back to where the refugees were resting in the shade of tall trees. Rune informed her on the way there about the results of his negotiations with Delacan.
You can await the arrival of Asar and the rest here. Then take what you need in terms of supplies from the town stores and head up the pass to the Hand. Remember to take more blankets and warm clothing. It is still cold up here till suntide. There will be no one to trouble you so far north.
They halted some paces away from the 50 or so reclining people. Already the Inrothians had rejoined their own column, ready to share this adventure with their fellows. Aldred reached out a hand to him, and he took it in both his.
You are leaving today?
Within the hour.
Then I wish you all success and a speedy return.
He lifted her hand and kissed it fleetingly. She watched him go, a sense of wonder washing over her. Just this quick touch and he was gone, but she had his words still to keep her, spoken under the starlight on that faraway beach. She would accompany Asar to the Hand, but her thoughts and hopes would travel eastwards, returning with the exile to the place where he was born, there to conquer or be vanquished. The farmers and their sons formed up with a small garrison of Keris in the rear of Lund's formation. Among the Viron, though they were unfamiliar and awed, they did not feel quite so out of place. Besides, there were only 60 of them. They would seem ridiculous if placed among the Aaronite multitude. The impressive host set off once more, working ever closer to Belruth. Here they halted again for the midday meal. 8 more miles had been covered. Now there was a tentative mixing of the groups, fueled by mutual curiosity. Lund sought out the commander of the fortress town, the first he had seen in this fabled homeland of the Viran. His youth took the other by surprise, as did the questions he asked, revealing his almost complete ignorance of Nuria, its history and customs, its triumphs and reverses. He marveled also at the sight of mere boys carrying blades and armor as if they were veterans. The fragment of Lund's tale he heard at noontide was almost beyond belief, yet the amazements of this overwhelming day had convinced him of its probable truth. The youth spoke with an antiquated accent, often using a harder, more exact pronunciation or old-fashioned vocabulary. Just by looking at them, he was persuaded that they were without deception or trickery, and that the host of Aaron really meant to aid their former enemies. Perhaps he could dare ask the question that was burning in his mind. Why would the Westerners do this after so much bloodshed and hatred? The youth regarded him with a puzzled frown. Why would they hesitate, he asked, when they shared a common enemy? It was a simple matter if one had not been fortified by long cycles of ill report, insult, and violence. Delacan felt the beginnings of dismay and shame at the former readiness for ignorant judgment, the eager participation in an ill-informed campaign of hate. The world that he had lived in was disintegrating, having lost the masters who upheld it and the principles that governed it. The cloak of night stretched endlessly on over untended fields and empty meadows. Even here inside the mountain, Gareth sensed the darkened void over Nuria, so stark and cold in the absence of the sun. It had to be the middle of the late Genesis night, for he felt the measuring gaze of Lauren's eyes scanning the ground from their zenith in the southern sky. Sleep had entirely deserted him, though he could not recall the cause of his waking. All was silent and still in the emptiness of the room. The low illumination of a wall crystal fell in ghostly waves from wall to wall. He preferred not to extinguish it entirely when he went to bed. Too many bad memories fed on the dark. Gareth leaned back against the pillow, sighing. Unexpectedly, urgently, a call surged through his insides, causing a physical sensation akin to vertigo in its intensity. It was clearer even than if someone had shouted his name. His eyes staring, he threw back the blankets and swung his legs to the ground. Already he felt the prickling in the air, kindling every sense to strain for things beyond its reach. A moment of truth was about to unfold itself. Again the surging came, making him gasp and clutch his stomach. He raised up and hurried for the door. Whatever wanted his attention was not going to wait. Through the dark passages he went, hardly noticing distance or direction, following the inaudible summons. Glimmers from crystals along the way beckoned him on till he came to a familiar doorway. Here the sensation faded abruptly, leaving him under the looming dark stairway veiled in shadow. Only now did he become aware of the cold, the smooth stone under his bare feet, and he shivered in his nightshirt. A single word bathed the spiral of stairs in deep purple. Gareth ascended slowly, dragging his fingers along the outer wall. Up and up he went, as if in a dream, remembering the first time he had climbed these steps. The same doorway waited for him above, and he pressed through the arch into the dull amber glow beyond. Immediately the dusty smell of the bookery surrounded him. Yet the tomes and scrolls held no attraction for him this night, and he picked his way among them to the brass-bound door with its crystal pattern. The amber eye was illuminated and frowned down on him as if on an intruder. He shivered again and touched the latch. It slid open noiselessly. Starlight fell through the huge chrysolite pane. Gareth found himself standing on the edge of the void, his fingers touching the cold glass. Beyond him the door had shut unnoticed. Expectation and apprehension whirled about him, starting the trembling through his body. High to the south sprawled the constellation of the Broadwing, with a crown above it, brilliant in its sable field. Below him were the walls of Belruth, containing within them the agony of a dying people in the final throes of their destruction. The sick fear of the Locked Eye touched him, and he cringed instinctively under the shadow of their passing. Fire poured from high windows and dwellings in the courtyards unchecked, as the people scattered and hid in cellars and storerooms, all resistance forgotten, their final feeble trust betrayed.
The king is slain!
A cry without words, augmenting their despair, arose about the milling crowds. Here and there the soldiers stood and died, among them the golden dragon of the guard, their blades now little more than a testimony of impotence and shame. All of its long cycles of ritual and tradition could not avail Nuria in this hour, and the falsehoods it had embraced took on form and substance in such irresistible fashion. The king's gate swung wide open, breached without a blow, and there was no concerted effort to secure it against the hordes pouring into the city. The man who had called him brother and betrayed him to horrible death was no more, himself taken in by the shadow. There was no longer a leader to inspire or instruct. And the great deceiver came striding up the road, the odors of smoke and death all about him, his triumph complete. How he exulted in the destruction, the obliteration of all things Viron, till the last memory of these sons of the soldier god was eradicated. Gareth felt the fear of him escalating. A warning sounded in his mind, but the anguish of what he saw could not be ignored. A flame was kindled in his thoughts, a terrible desire to stop that strutting figure by any means possible. It mattered not if he was seen or heard. From the feathered height he would strike out and call the sky, the earth, the very flames devouring the city as witnesses against this abomination. Yet in the fierce confusion he heard his name called, and the grip of the Sear held him in place till the giddy moment passed. Gareth stood gasping, tears blurring his vision, turning the stars outside to smears of bewildered grief. Gradually, the forceful hold on his shoulders relaxed. Intrigued, he glanced behind him. The Seer was really there. Despite himself, a sob tore through the boy, as if this witness to his hopeless rage had multiplied his sorrow. Veer reached out spontaneously to embrace the child, to hold him and comfort him, as if prompted by some long-forgotten instinct. All the armor of his hurt and indifference did not avail him, for his heart was crying with the clinging, trembling boy, even though his eyes could no longer shed a tear. He spoke softly, as if the thought he would express was fragile, even here in the darkness and isolation.
How strange it is that such a one as you is here to pay for all these unending cycles of betrayal and rejection. You weep for sins that are not yours. You suffer the evil consequences of a harvest sown by others. I could have abandoned them, Gareth, forgotten them, were it not for you.
As he heard the words, Gareth felt the great sorrow abate, and he let them soothe him till he could form a reply.
He will not spare the city, not Belruth, not Gilrith, nor any other. He will not rest till every last Viron has bled out his life and breathes no more.
Veer continued in the same low tone.
I have seen this many times, from where you are standing now.
He pushed the boy away and held him at arm's length, suddenly realizing that the mask he had worn for more than half a millennium had slipped. If Gareth noticed anything about his discomfort, he gave no sign.
Little remains but to live out this season and witness the wrath and final vengeance of Horan.
Veer released the boy and they sat down on the cold floor, Gareth with his back against the pane of chrysolite. He sniffed loudly and drew the sleeve of his nightshirt across his face. His question was almost an accusation.
You will not abandon them.
Veer stared out at the stars beyond the crystal pane. Had they not testified to him that this hour would arrive?
I cannot deny that the temptation to do just that is almost overwhelming. You are aware of the depths of their betrayal, the venomous persecution they have practiced against any and all who would but reach out in this direction. They exulted in destroying all traces of the art, except for the mockery of their rituals and ceremonies. They set up an image of stone in their temple, as if I had no voice or animation. They corrupted the principles that set them apart from other peoples. Should I count the numbers of those who defied them, who died the death of dogs turned on their masters? Should I measure the faith of the few who hid themselves in cellars and caves to weep and work in futility against the slavery of the questers? There was anger in me for a very long time, and shame also, for the harlots they have become. But even that faded, till there was just the silence and the living death of indifference. But I knew all along that the lament sung by Oler would require me to make a decision. If you had never touched that stone in Belruth, defying the wickedness of centuries, I would not have wavered in condemning them.
Gareth stared at the great winged figure in front of him. He knew that every word was true, and could appreciate suddenly the drawing of destiny that he had not been able to resist.
Will you stop the shadow from destroying Belruth?
I cannot prevent that from happening, but there is hope with the forces of Gilrith at hand. Only if they strike at the right moment, when the enemy is confused and overconfident while overrunning the city. With the great force Kael has gained in the west to aid them, there will be at least a struggle for dominion over the coasts of the inland sea.
Gareth understood what was not spoken out loud. He had suspected this ever since that glimpse he had had of the southern force in Lakeside. No army in the north could prevail over such horrors and dark sorcery.
They will fail then. Will you watch and not help them?
His voice was pleading, an echo of the thoughts tormenting Veer for cycles without count.
I know what will happen there, you understand. If I should venture out to aid them.
You cannot save them. Not even you. Are the Loctii too strong?
Don't say that word in here.
Veer's urgent whisper cut him off.
Such abominations should not even be named. Where did you learn that term?
Gareth was a little startled.
I don't know. It came into my head.
The very thought of them is shameful, perverse. They ought not to exist in this place. If you know anything of the realms beyond and the laws of life, you may realize how their presence compromises the very substance of Myril and invites the fires of utter annihilation for the entire world. In order to win, the Shadow has abandoned his sanity. Such a victory as this will not set him free. It will hasten his judgment.
What will you do? You said you will not abandon them now.
Veer sighed and lowered his gaze to meet Gareth's.
I know what I have to do, and I am ready to do it. I have known it since I saw you the first time on that snowy slope in the pass.
Gareth shivered involuntarily. He brought up his knees and stretched the hem of the nightshirt over them. The memory of the shock, even perturbation, he had seen on the face of the seer then had never left him. Veer rose up abruptly and offered a hand to the shivering boy. Gareth took hold of it and stood to his feet.
Back to bed with you. And next time you feel the whispers of this room, wait till daylight. The view is so much better.
He regarded the boy's single garment.
You are cold. Did you not think to dress before you came up here?
A little smile appeared on Gareth's lips.
No, there was no time for that. Actually, I didn't realize where I was going.
Veer turned to steer him towards the door.
The sight can be a hard master at times. I know.
from a dreamless sleep feeling strangely comforted. The visions were not his burden alone. There were stronger, more capable shoulders to carry it with him. The Seer was aware of Belruth and the monstrous forces arranged against it. He would not let it be devoured. While he washed and dressed, he remembered something about Gilreth that Veer had mentioned. He thought of his grandfather and uncle and wondered if they knew what they were about to face. It warmed him to know that they were in league with the Seer. Whatever they could contribute to the struggle at Belruth would be well directed. He hurried down to find Sith, his stomach complaining from lack of sustenance. The Vadran was nowhere to be seen, and he looked up Lathan and Ceridwen instead, who informed him that it was almost time for the noonday meal. Gareth decided to help them with the preparations. He enjoyed their company and had endless questions to ask them regarding the clearings in the Dankwood. Lathan soon complained that he would have them serve the meal only at supper time with all his interruptions. He shared their table, keeping up the stream of conversation. Ceridwen was glad for once to see him in such high spirits. The brooding sadness that accompanied him most of the time did not bode well for what lay ahead, she realized. This boy knew much of what was in store for the warriors on the field of battle. Had she not witnessed the spying on the enemy camp? Though the memory of that meddling filled her with dread. They were piling up the bowls and clearing tables when the Seer appeared. Veer had cloaked himself in the form of Kennath once more, since this seemed less intimidating when he moved around among the people. Gareth searched his face for some positive sign, but it was impossible to read as usual. The still imposing figure merely nodded at Ceridwen and Lathan, then pulled the boy aside. Around them the Viran moved in respectful and curious silence. Veer did not seem tired from the night before. Perhaps he had also slept in. Gareth imagined a hint of excitement in his eyes as he spoke.
I have something to show you.
The excitement spilled over into the boy. He knew by the way it was said that this was no ordinary announcement.
Come with me.
They walked out of the hall in silence, eyes following their every step. Gareth soon realized where they were heading. He had come this way to meet Rune after his vigil in the Cavern of Initiates. His heartbeat quickened. This was a place he had longed to see. He remembered vividly the sham ceremony in the Temple of Belruth, the droning priests, the dead ritual, the lies and deceit. How cheated he had felt then. It was hard to imagine now that he had ever feared the Questers. The vaulted cavern opened up before them, immense and empty, reaching up into dark alcoves and domes from which hung suspended chandeliers of white crystal, sculpted over millennia by the steady dripping of water seeping through the stone. Gareth stared about him, entranced. There were no furnishings to be seen. Low light in many shades flowed from the wall crystals, reminding him of the temple once more. But there were no seats in this place, no arena-like clearing where the fire flowed from rock. The simple, rough stone stood by itself on a slightly raised platform. As soon as he saw it, Gareth felt the shivers moving up his spine. A prickling sensation started in his temples, and he brought up a hand to his throat unnoticed. Veer strode over to the stone and halted beside it. He beckoned the boy forward. Gareth noticed that there was something lying on the stone, wrapped in a bluish cloth. Suspicions melted into certainty. His heart missed a beat.
It arrived a season ago, but in the turmoil and anguish of the time, I nearly forgot about it.
Gareth walked forward in a dream. He reached out to the velvety covering and stopped in mid-air, casting a questioning look towards Veer.
It's yours, and quite overdue.
The man reassured him. The cloth slipped away from chrysolite lines crafted in perfection. Gareth's jaw dropped in astonishment.
It's a blade! Oh!
He laughed with delight.
Is it really mine?
Veer spoke in solemn tones.
It comes directly from the hand, fashioned by vision, specifically for you, by the Master Silrain, long before you were born. You will be the first to compose it. There has been no previous owner. The reason for this will soon be apparent.
The boy's fingers trembled a little. as he stroked the smooth surface. It rested on the hilt for a moment, waiting for a reaction, then closed around the grip in rapture. This was his blade, the seer said, and no tainted weapon passed down from others. His thoughts alone would touch it, without interference from the motives of other men. He slipped it free of the covering, testing its weight. He caught himself measuring its dimensions against what he remembered of the seer blade. There was only the slightest disappointment when he realized it was significantly shorter. As he lifted it higher, the light from many crystals played along the glossy surface, here and there, but the heart of it remained veiled. He was almost afraid to touch it with thought, praying that the spark inside it would be amber. Since he could remember, he had always desired what he then believed to be his seer blade, brilliant amber, like the rising of the sun after a stormy night. He knew now that this shade could only give him an in-blade, but somehow he still preferred that over any other. Without further hesitation, he found it, clear as the noonday sun before him, and allowed it to become complete, fascinated by the ease of it all. The tiniest note sounded in his ears, a cheerful, silvery tone. At the center of the construction glowed a pale white light that faded after a moment. Gareth frowned in incomprehension. The words slipped out of him.
But it has no color.
Veer watched him, his head to one side. There was a flash of that rare smile.
Just like mine.
Startled eyes were turned on him. The blade was lowered.
What does that mean?
The seer held out his hand, and the weapon, once again the size of a long dagger, was placed in it. He gripped it by the hilt and lifted the tip of the blade with his other hand.
It is a beautiful weapon.
Promptly, he held it out to the boy again, hilt first. Gareth took it reverently, holding it as the seer had done. There was something mysterious about this blade, something beyond his previous experience.
This is not a seer blade. Fenwith was a great man, first among his mighty brethren. So is your father. Not one born in a millennium may wield that great weapon like he is able to. But the weapon you hold is not the implement of a warrior. I am proud to know that it will never be easy for you to take a life, no matter how perverse or evil it is. There will be no battle madness for you, like there is none for me. Instead, the sadness of destroying even what has to be destroyed will haunt you forever, and mar your purity, dulling your vision, robbing you of peace. It is only to such an unwilling servant that such power can be given. You hold within your hand the blade of judgment, hewn, a flow from that substance that shaped Myril. It will enhance your senses within and without, and discern the motives of all things animated or not. When you have mastered it, you will have little need of a septalion for protection, and it will come at your bidding instantly, no matter how far away or how deep you are buried in the ground. Its song is perfection and illumination. Its edge cannot be dulled. Many of its qualities will come to you in time, and like all blades, they will complement what is within you. This type of blade, more than any other, chooses its master.
He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder.
I am proud that it has chosen you. It is much easier for me now to do what I have to. Let us hope that you will be given the opportunity to grow into a man and use it.
Gareth regarded him steadily, at once awed and disappointed. The sudden hope that had flared in him was tempered by these last words.
Why can't I use it now?
Veer stepped closer to him and, contrary to carefully cultivated habit, reached out both hands, placing them on the sides of the boy's face. His voice was barely above a whisper.
Have you never wondered why the shadow so desired to destroy you? No, more than that, consume you. It was more than portents and premonitions that prompted his relentless pursuit. Perhaps you even stirred him into action before he intended. He had to rid himself of you while you were young and vulnerable. Yet in doing so, he set in motion the chain of events that has led us to this hour. I know that you desire to aid your father in his struggle, but you are not strong enough for that. Not with the blade.
Gareth broke away from the hold, his expression one of anguish. He took a step backwards, hugging the blade to his chest.
Then, what good are all these gifts, if none of them can give me what I want?
Veer shrugged sadly.
I cannot see all things. Even if you cannot help him with raw power, there may be other ways.
He brought up a hand to touch his chin.
I have seen you with the Viron boys. You can use a bow.
Gareth shrugged.
A little.
Why don't you fetch that fine instrument the little Vadran prince gave you? It may be that we can unlock some of its art.
The boy regarded him a little suspiciously. Was this some ploy to occupy his thoughts, or was the man in earnest? One way or another, he would love to show off that splendid weapon to the seer. He set off at a trot. Haldred traveled northwestwards in a haze of contentment. The tall mountains of the Hand, ever growing in stature and splendor, seemed to welcome them with open arms. The habits ingrained during their long flight were still with her in unguarded moments, though they now served only to make her laugh. Quick, furtive glances into the undergrowth, conversations in low tones to allow for passing undetected, as well as listening for enemies approaching, checking regularly that sentries were alert and in position whenever they stopped for a rest. It was incredible that there could be no threat lurking in the hills, no enemy chasing after them to rob or enslave. The white peaks were free and pure, like the snow that covered them, untainted and remote, untouched by the dark designs of men. There were birds still among the trees, the occasional deer or fox, squirrels staring at them in curiosity. It was a world she had despaired of ever seeing again. Yet it was not possible to forget the approaching storm that had already robbed her of hearth and home. She thought much upon the hasty exchanges with Rune along the way, the reference to dragons and dark sorcery that the Swamp Lord had enlisted, and she wondered if the new-found art would avail him against such monstrous perversity. Despite these forebodings, a serenity accompanied her footsteps, and the unqualified faith she had so desired to place in this man lingered inexplicably in her musings, as if the dramatic flight had wiped away her ability to reason and left her with a blind confidence only a child could entertain. Her arguments were supported with such illogical and irrational evidence as had been gleaned from a look or an impression, an instant of understanding, and the impulse of trust it generated. Now she wanted nothing more than to walk in the dreams and heroic tales she had conjured as a girl, without the intrusions of what others deemed reality. If she was self-deluded, she did not care. Haldred had come to the end of rationality. Now she watched the children from the streets of Breck take her son by the hand to chase happily after snow rabbits, till that haunted look faded from his eyes, and his shy smile appeared fleetingly, and she could believe again that they would escape the nightmare and find the sun shining brightly on the other side of the tall mountains. At night they could let the fires blaze without fear of attracting swarmlings or bandits. There was laughter and jesting, even a song or two. For all the world, they were mere travelers, and not fugitives without tribe or kingdom. Hussar wore his smile of irresistible cheer, giving the lie to the drooping peacock feather in his hat, and the travel-worn clothes that made him appear more like a pauper than the rich merchant he used to be. The entire party was tired but exuberant, sitting together under the stars to share the gossip and rumors of that world they now left behind. She laughed with them and speculated about the future and what it held for such as they. The impressive host from the west had convinced them that all was not lost, that there would be a tomorrow for them also. She did not tell them of the horrors these men would soon face, nor of the fear she had banished from her thoughts concerning the unlikely survival of their unrecognized champion. No, the wonder of their many escapes surrounded them now, and the darkness was friendly and comforting to all. Still, in the white morning on their way upwards to the lake, a sadness settled in her heart, for which she could find no particular explanation. The trees whispered it to one another, and the cold earth confirmed the tales in silent sympathy. This was a realm men never entered but to make war on one another, where life and purpose had retreated out of sight, and the tall towers of stone kept their painful secrets. By the time the pale blue waters came into sight, everyone seemed to be affected by it. Expressions were more solemn than before, almost respectful, as one would feel in a crypt of kings, till the children kept close to adults, and no one walked by themselves. Sear walked next to her, in silence at first, but soon he felt the need to express something of what both of them sensed.
It is a strange place, this.
His voice lacked the usual buoyancy. They kept their eyes on the trail, where the hundreds of footmarks pointed in the opposite direction. The host had come this way.
It is the realm of the Sear.
He continued.
Deserted and silent all these long cycles since the summoning.
Haldred was curious.
He is no longer here.
Sear shrugged.
Who can tell? The comings and goings of such a one is not for common people to know.
He hesitated and then said,
But the deeds and omissions of the past rest heavily here, that is sure.
There was a commotion ahead, interrupting their doleful contemplations. They hurried forward to where the column had halted, with people spilling round the edges to get a glimpse of the cause. In the road, on a small mound covered in snow, stood a small figure, apparently waiting for them. Haldred pressed through the crowd to where she could see him clearly. It was a man, slight in build, and a head shorter than the men of their company. Sear gripped her elbow and steered her forward till they stood in front of him. He bowed low. The little man nodded in return and spoke calmly.
Sear of Breck, Princess Haldred of Ligerium.
She nodded dumbly, taken by surprise. Could it be that this was one of the elusive Vadran?
My name is Sith. I am here to guide you to the towers on behalf of my master Veer the Seer.
Not all the men could keep up with the murderous pace of the advance. The Aaronites and Inrathians had been marching for many days, from dawn to dusk, and the fatigue was beginning to take its toll. Men were falling behind, in twos and threes, in dozens. Ranald received reports of the thinning ranks with grim expectation. He visited the tents at night, the campfires and sprawling, worn-out figures around them. There was no lack of courage or resolve, he realized. Not all the men from Arran were in fighting condition, yet it grieved him that some would fail to meet the extreme challenge ahead for all. If they should fail at Belruth for lack of 100 or 2, it would be a catastrophe. When he could not encourage them, he shamed them instead by pointing out the Viran children, who were all still with them. The men knew this was not quite valid. These children had covered a fraction of the distance they had. Yet they listened and promised, rubbing tired limbs and nursing aches and pains. From a man such as Ranald, they could take this unjust reprimand. Among the Inrathians, a few men had also fallen behind. Hannik dispatched one of his trusty sergeants to keep the stragglers together and make sure they would arrive on the field of battle as soon as they could. The struggle before the city might be a prolonged one, during which reinforcements would be most welcome. He was also concerned that the men would not be in proper condition for fighting, something he mentioned to Rune. They decided to pause at Lundvir for a proper breather, maybe allowing some of the slower ones to catch up again. Ranald welcomed this proposition. He had the most to gain by it. Though he held by far the greater force, the leeching away of his companies embarrassed him greatly. Already 1,000 or so were strung out behind the main column. Half a day's rest would certainly lift the spirits of the entire company. A collective sigh of relief was heard when the walls of Llanvir finally came in sight. The frantic pace would ease till the next morning called them from their beds. The huge column halted on the banks of a stream well short of the city and proceeded to set up camp. It was barely noon, and the men looked forward to a cooked meal, a proper wash, and an early night. Rune picked a few men and moved on to the city walls. Lund and Bruthael, Hanek and Delacan, as well as Ephraim and an Inrathian guard, set off together. The gates were shut and spearmen lined the crenellated wall and towers. No doubt there were archers standing at the ready. Rune held up his arms, crossed at the wrists, palms outward, in the sign of truce. From the gatehouse came a shout in response.
Only two. Step up to the postern, slowly.
Rune grabbed Delacan by the arm and dragged him forward. The young man's presence with the host would be a strong argument in their favor. The postern gate was to the right side of the main gatehouse and had a heavy grille guarding it. The city's commander and his delegation stood waiting there on the inside. They would have to negotiate through the bars. Rune could see the surprise in the aging captain's eyes as the latter realized there were two Virons standing before his gate to bargain for what he supposed would be the surrender of his garrison. Moreover, one of them used to be the commander at Keris. He addressed himself to the young man first.
Delacan, have you been forced into this treachery? You gave your word.
No, no.
The young man raised his hand.
I'm here of my own volition, Sebin. This is not an invasion.
Not?
The older man regarded him suspiciously.
What do you call that over there, then?
He pointed down the road to the huge Aronite encampment. Delacan persisted.
There are many Viron in that host, and others besides, from islands in the Witch Sea. All come to the aid of Nuria.
Sebin shook his head.
Nuria is overrun. Even the sea ravens have turned on us. Just yesterday, the people from Ingerval arrived here to take shelter against them. Where is your garrison?
They are here with me, and also the farmers of the region. Hear them out, Sebin. There is no hope for us without their help.
At last, the older man turned to Rune. His frown deepened considerably as he guessed the identity of this strange Nurian.
I am Sebin Seth Eothard, commander in Llanvir by authority of King Lucain. Who are you, and what is your business in Nuria?
Rune recognized the man for what seemed to him ages before. Of course, over 13 cycles had elapsed since their last encounter during those terrible days of confusion and despair following the death of Galad. Sebin had been in attendance at his judgment and sentence, and had witnessed the merciful banishment imposed by his brother the king.
I am Rune Sith Alvarad, and I speak for this host, Aronite, Viron, and Inrathian, by permission of King Ranald of Arran, Lord Karth of Herin Inrath, and Lund of the Towers. This force has entered Nuria with the sole purpose of destroying its enemies, whether remnants of the swarm or the overwhelming hordes of the traitor Malik Yulian of Tiralan. We are in alliance with Count Byrand of Gilreth, and are seeking yours as well.
Sebin's eyes had widened at the first claims, but he was obviously astonished by the rest. It took a few moments to recover.
These are fantastic claims, Lord Rune, and I suppose hard to prove. Needless to say, you have entered Nuria against the commands of the former king, and I am obligated by law to put you to death, not aid you in your endeavors.
Despite the forceful nature of these words, they lacked conviction, and were pronounced almost mechanically. Their owner knew full well that any such threat could not be carried out. Rune sensed this doubt and uncertainty, and decided to confront rather than be diplomatic.
I remember you, Sebin, and I'm sure you remember me. I am not going to try and defend myself to you. Let it suffice to state that Fengor placed his own crimes upon my head, though that no longer has relevance. All that matters now is that we are facing the extermination of our race unless we can stand together.
He pointed to where the other men of their party waited.
If the combination of arms among Aronites, Viron, and other victims of Malik's scheming is not enough to convince you, yea, and even your own countrymen joining our ranks, there is no proof to win you over. Speak but for a few moments to these Viron from the southern slave pits of the traitor's realm, and no doubt will remain of who the real enemy is. Even the king of Arran has seen that much, and has brought his men all these miles to aid a former enemy.
The older man regarded him with that same frown. His reply was not what Rune expected.
I remember too well. I never held much store by what the council decided back then. Many of us were suspicious, but there was no way to oppose the ruling, let alone the king and his questors. Perhaps we were cowards, and we did not act out of fear that a similar fate may befall us. Yet I grieved for you and the young queen who had withered overnight.
There was a pause. Sebin's eyes betrayed his regret and lingering pity. He looked past Rune to the waiting men.
But, as you say, there are more urgent matters in hand. What is it that you require of me?
Rune was more than a little surprised to discover such sentiments regarding his exile among the loyal followers of Fengor. Even at the time of the Truth Council, his brother had been a greater tyrant than he had believed possible, ruling by fear and intimidation. The poor Aethera had had no chance to resist such a ruthless despot. Sebin was not a fool. The only real hope Lanvir had was that Rune's story was true. There was no resisting the Aaronites, and therefore no real alternative but to cooperate.
All the supplies you can spare from the city. We have outdistanced our baggage carts, and every able-bodied man you have to join our march. We will camp here till tomorrow morning. There is time to equip your force till then.
Sebin appeared to have reservations on this account.
It seems the essential thing to do, Lord Rune, but I hate to point out to you that the men we have here are all second-rate and hardly fit for garrison duty, let alone fighting in the field. Almost 3,000 refugees have come in from Ingerbal, and they are in as sorry a state as my supposed soldiers. Fengor took all the regulars for his full expedition into Ligurium. Perhaps the men I have will better serve behind the walls of this fortress. Here at least they are of some value.
Rune considered this for a moment, but then shook his head.
If we fail at Belruth, Lanvir will not stand. You are an experienced man. Tell me which is better, to divide your strength and wait for the enemy, or meet him with your full force in the field.
Sebin's gaze dropped to the ground. Rune could see that his hesitation was motivated by noble intentions. This commander actually cared for the welfare of his men.
You are right, of course, but it will be a slaughter if they are deployed in a battle line. They will not stand before a determined onslaught.
Rune spoke reassuringly, more out of sympathy than conviction.
Perhaps we will not need them to strike a blow. Every man we present on that battlefield will bolster the faith and morale of our forces. Their mere presence on the day will make a difference.
Sebin turned resigned eyes on him. He simply nodded and did not reply. Instead, he shouted to the sergeants at the main gate to open it and order the men to stand down. Relief showed in the faces all round. There would be no fighting that day. Rune returned to the waiting group, nodding slightly as he came. Here was another small victory for their advance. Already the gates were swinging wide, and excited voices could be heard from the walls. It had to be a great reassurance to find the mighty host on their doorstep intended to champion their cause and not force their surrender. Lund addressed him as he joined them.
You have a gift for this. Men trust your words. The Lord of the Tour has always attempted to divide us, even in the pits, forcing the strong men to do combat one against the other. Our survival and the ability to resist him depended on the trust we shared. You are a man who can create that trust.
Rune smiled ruefully.
That has not always been so. And if it be so now, it is not something I cultivated over these many cycles. Perhaps only in the sense that I cannot abide falsehood, and everyone knows that.
That is all that is required, Ranald interjected. A man who hates deceit will harm his own cause rather than gain an ally by flattery. You have that air about you. Even when you first told us about the dragon, I had no doubt but what you did see it. Evrain could not help remarking.
Especially when you emphasize that with a promise of violence to any dissenter.
Rune smiled at the memory. It was a pleasant afternoon of rest and relaxation. The more energetic among the men splashed about noisily in the stream, enjoying the warm Genesis weather after the still icy highlands of Argoth sand. Not one of the Aaronites could have imagined that they would ever be so boisterous and carefree within sight of the walls of a Nurian fortress. It was a strange sensation, letting down one's guard deep within what used to be the territory of the arch-enemy. Lund and his group camped with Hunnic and the Indrathians, with whom they could communicate in part by using one of the Southland dialects. Already the Viran were becoming adept at the island mixture of coastal languages, but only Lund was able to hold a conversation with the Aaronites. He found the translation of sound into meaning surprisingly easy, almost enjoyable. Towards evening, Rune paid him a visit. They walked southwards together for perhaps half a mile, talking all the while of the art and its demands on endurance and resolve. When they were sure not to be disturbed, Rune drew his blade and requested that Lund do the same.
The Seer asked me to show you how to preserve one's energy and use only the necessary force in each blow. However, I have never used the real potential of a blade in combat like you have. Perhaps we can learn from each other.
Lund regarded the longer blade of the other, remembering that night in Terralan, when the secret surrounding it had been revealed. Such a mighty weapon might wear out the wielder even quicker than the regular blade. He was almost relieved that the task of carrying this one had not fallen on him.
I will show you what I can, though I'm convinced that my experience is very limited.
Rune smiled at this thought, but said no more on the matter.
Very well. Prepare yourself.
The blades were composed, and the opponents took up their positions. Ere there was any serious sparring, however, Rune had to demonstrate an appropriate stance, footwork, and balance, as well as the rudimentary blows for feinting and parrying. He was pleased to note the other's speed of hand and reaction, almost sufficient to make up for his lack of technique. Even with a little practice, Lund, with his natural ability, would vastly improve his swordsmanship. The latter also soon acquired an awareness for finesse and style, watching the intricate and graceful movements of his tutor. There was much one could achieve with the blade alone, without making use of its exhausting energies. Even these last could be measured and controlled in intensity, allowing for prolonged use, instead of striking only a few powerful blows. Lund marveled at the skill and ability of his instructor. Surely none of the Viran fighters from Grail could have compared to this one. The speed and accuracy of his thrusts were overwhelming, the agility of limb almost superhuman. It was as though he could predict the attacking blows before they were delivered, for his blades never failed to meet them. Lund worked as hard as he could, without allowing himself to slip into the battle madness, heeding the advice, copying tricks and maneuvers, till his chest was heaving and his mind spinning. Yet, when they sat down on their backs to a tree for a rest, a feeling of elation took hold of him. What an opportunity it was for him to have met such a master. All he desired was more time to learn and practice. He sighed contentedly and then spoke his thoughts.
This is what I always wanted, to be a fighter. Perhaps if the tour had not tired of their sport, I would have become one. Not that there would have been any gain in it. They all died in their cells without striking one blow for freedom. In the end, it was the boys from the running trails that would fight the battles.
Rune looked up at the youth next to him. Their eyes met.
By all accounts, these boys were more than equal to the task.
Lund's gaze dropped down to the blade in his grip.
What a great asset someone like you would have been to us. Our battles were chaotic. We lacked skill and experience. Many times, I believe we were just fortunate to survive.
In the light of the easy friendship between them, Rune ventured into hazardous terrain.
Did you actually stand before the dragon?
Lund looked up sharply, wondering what had prompted such a question.
I waited for it, though I had promised to run. When it looked down at me, I was so afraid it was difficult to breathe. One thought repeated itself over and over in my mind. I was dead already. I did not think of the pain when it would strike me, just that my strength, my resolve, my hope were all as nothing at that moment. I could not find the blade, and did not have the will to look for it. All was dark and futile. I could not even flee from it. If those cages had not opened just then, You may understand why I keep those two young boys close to me. Faced with that beast, I was no more than bait.
Rune felt the apprehension starting in his stomach. He had seen that fearsome monster up close. There would not even be steel armor on his body when he faced it. Try as he might, he could not hold on to that certainty and purpose he had possessed in the towers. Perhaps he had lived too long on anger and hate, and had no proper substitute on which to focus his resolve. He was suddenly completely vulnerable without it. Above them the stars grew bright. The night air was fresh, and he shivered with it. He dug the blade of Finwith into the ground, and rose up on his feet. Holding out a hand to the youth from Grail, he tried to sound light-hearted.
We have some miles to go before we confront such dangers again, and there will be many more blades to stand and face it with us.
Lund gripped the extended hand and pulled himself up.
I am most encouraged by that. Now that I have lived as a free man, I know there is nothing to equal it but to die as the same.
Rune tarried outside the tent that night, to be alone with his thoughts. His gaze searched the dark heavens as if for some sign of reassurance. Perhaps he had missed something, a vital point the seer had made, or he had not lost himself as completely in the art as was required. But he could not return and try again. There was no more time for reflection or training. The miles were fast disappearing. They had gained Lundveer at last, 40 miles short of Belruth. He watched the flickering fires of the watchmen, searching for the strength and abandon he used to have. Where was that reckless man who had stormed the walled house in Caerton for the sake of vengeance? He had known no fear then. A broken man made whole again. What if he was still broken and not whole? If only there was someone with whom he could talk it over. Now that Haldred had gone, he felt the desolation creep up on him. His thoughts were his own, not to be shared with the others around him. His fears could not be admitted or even aired. No one shared his confidence. He belonged to no one, not the new Viran from the south, nor the old from Nuria. Hanik and his men were friendly and companionable, but even there he remained an outsider. Why had that boy not come with him? Did he not realize that Rune's need of him was at least as great as his need of Rune? And this was the trembling hour, when the certainty of the towers was so far away. His thoughts turned towards the cavern and its odd stone marker.
Here beginneth the search.
He knew that his own search was nearing its end. Had he been born for this hour only? Was all the rest of his life without lasting purpose? Aethera was waiting in the worlds beyond, but Gareth would remain if the shadow did not consume them all. Gareth, the boy, would be sleeping now, perhaps a little sad still at their final parting. He remembered the quivering body in his arms, the vain struggle against the tears, and there, like a distant knock, came the questing thought from the towers. At first he believed he had imagined it, for the longing was so perfectly mirrored inside him. Yet the touch did not fade, and he hastened to reply,
Should you be awake at such an hour?
And you?
I have much on my conscience, and many memories of evil to haunt me.
You should not entertain them. There is no more reason for that.
Rune found himself able to admit the truth.
It is the evil that awakes me in Belruth that keeps me from sleep tonight.
He felt the child's concern and anxiety in the reply.
It keeps me awake also, but I am hiding here while you have to face it.
Rune found a measure of comfort in this expression, and the honest abandon with which he could formulate his real feelings.
A great fear is upon me. I know what is required, but no man can stand in the fire of a dragon and live. The blade obeys my will, but I do not know if the armor will hold. Sometimes I'm sure, but then there are times, like tonight, that I am convinced otherwise.
Did you not try it out?
That I did, in the silence and safety of the towers. It is another matter when standing before a beast of such unimaginable power. I have seen it, Gareth, and felt the paralyzing fear.
There was near panic in the child's reply.
I will come to you. It is my doing that you are in this impossible place. If you will die, I shall never forgive myself.
Put that out of your mind. In the end, I chose this path for myself. As much as I care about your opinion, I would not venture into the lair of a dragon simply because you asked me to. I am not doing this for you only, or the people. It is my own purpose now.
Let me help you. I will go insane just waiting here.
There was the tiniest pause, during which he sensed something of the man's light-hearted recrimination.
As I recall, you were the one who opted to stay. I would have had you along all the way. It's a little late now.
Gareth felt the unintentional sting of it. He had been a fool. If Rune would die, there was no avoiding it, but it would not be for lack of trying to prevent it.
I shall meet you in Belruth.
You will use the gate.
I shall, and I shall not be alone.
The darkness lost some of its menace. It was so much easier to believe when one was not alone. If only for the understanding, it would be worth having the boy close to him. All others must not see his weakness, his doubt. Here was an enemy he could not outsmart or overpower with his Viron trickery. This foe would test the very substance of his soul, and he had so little confidence that there was sufficient faith to meet this supreme challenge. Let the messenger find him, and bring out the hidden worth like he had done before. This struggle could not be won in the mind among reasonings and fearful memories. Let that strange boy work the magic again, and transform him into a being of absolute confidence in the strange power he could not understand.